I was holding Corporal Danny Bishop's intestines in my bare hands when the second wave of German artillery started. They were slippery and warm, the only warm thing in the Ardennes that December, and Danny was looking at me with this expression like he was embarrassed, like he was apologizing for being such a bother. "Just hold 'em in," I kept saying, even though I didn't know what I was talking about. I was a rifleman, not a medic. The medic was dead. Everyone who knew anything was dead. The shells started walking toward us, boom, 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 each one closer than the last, shaking the frozen earth, sending snow and dirt raining down into our foxhole. And Danny, with half his gut spilling through my fingers, said the last thing he ever said to me: "Tell my mom I didn't cry." The next shell landed close enough to lift me off my knees. I don't remember letting go of Danny. I remember the ringing in my ears, the taste of dirt and copper in my mouth, crawling through snow that had turned black with smoke and something else. Bodies, pieces of bodies, equipment scattered like toys thrown by an angry child. I crawled until I found a crater deep enough to hide in, and I pressed myself into the frozen earth and waited to die. But I didn't die. And somehow, in the chaos that followed, I found the one person who would change the course of my life forever. A 19-year-old farm boy from Kentucky named Marcus Webb, lying in a frozen foxhole with a piece of German steel in his stomach, abandoned, forgotten, waiting for someone to come. I'm 99 years old now. That was December 19th, 1944, 80 years ago. And I've spent every one of those years wondering the same thing. What kept Marcus Webb alive for 14 hours in that frozen hole when everything, the cold, the blood loss, the shock, should have killed him 10 times over? The Ardennes forest, Belgium? December 1944. Hitler's last desperate gamble. 250,000 German troops smashing through the weakest point in the Allied line. We called it the Bulge because that's what it did to our maps, this massive dent pushing westward. The 28th Infantry Division, my division, the bloody bucket they called us, caught the first wave. We'd been resting in what everyone thought was a quiet sector. 3 days before Christmas, cold enough to freeze the oil in your rifle. We thought we were safe. The Germans thought different. My name is James Hollister. Jimmy, to anyone who knew me back then. I was 22 years old, a corporal from Scranton, Pennsylvania, assistant squad leader with Fox Company's 2nd Battalion. I'd been in the war long enough to know that survival was mostly luck, and luck was a thing you couldn't count on. But I didn't know, none of us knew, that the next 72 hours would be the worst the American Army had seen since the Civil War. That morning started like every other in the Ardennes. Fog so thick you couldn't see 10 feet in front of your face. Cold so deep it got into your bones and stayed there. We were dug in near a little village called Clerf, just across the Luxembourg border. Nice position, good cover. Everyone thought we'd be there through Christmas. Sergeant Bill Corrigan was making the rounds when I woke up, checking on the men, making sure nobody had frozen to death in the night. Corrigan was 35, a career Army man from Chicago with a wife and 3 kids back home. He had this way of looking at you that made you feel like everything would be all right, even when you knew it wouldn't be. The old man, we called him, not to his face. Tommy Delaney was already awake, blowing on his fingers, trying to get them warm enough to write another letter to his girl back in Boston. 19 years old, wise cracker, always cold, even in summer. He wrote to her every single day, even when there was nothing to say. And then there was Doc Abernathy, Vincent Abernathy, our medic, 27, from Atlanta, a seminary student before the war, dropped out to enlist, carried a Bible in his med kit right next to the morphine syringes. He was praying when I saw him that morning, lips moving silently over his breakfast of frozen sea rations. We were a family, the four of us, or as close to a family as you could get in a place like that. The first sign came around 5:30, artillery flashes lighting up the fog from the east. Not ours, the sound was wrong. Distant thunder that didn't stop. Corrigan's face went white. "That's not ours," he said. The radio came alive, voices screaming from Easy Company 2 miles east. Panic. One phrase repeating, "They're everywhere! They're everywhere!" Orders came from battalion. Hold position. Delay the enemy. Buy time for retreat. We all knew what delay meant. It meant we weren't expected to survive. Corrigan gathered us, 12 men. He looked at each of us. "You know what we have to do," he said, "so let's do it right." No speeches, no heroics. Just 12 men checking ammunition, waiting for the end of the world. They came out of the fog like ghosts. Gray shapes, hundreds of them, moving through the trees. German infantry, Folks grenadiers with armor somewhere behind them. I could hear the tank engines growling in the distance. The sound a Panzer makes is something you never forget. It gets into your nightmares and stays there. We opened fire, M1 Garands against Kar 98s, the distinctive crack of American rifles against the sharper German sound. Rosenberg went down first, hit in the neck, dead before he hit the ground. Then Miller. Then the kid whose name I never learned, the replacement who'd arrived 3 days earlier. Tommy Delaney froze, just stood there, rifle in his hand, staring at the Germans coming toward us. I slapped him across the face, hard. "Shoot!" I screamed. "Shoot!" He started shooting. He didn't stop until his rifle was empty. Doc Abernathy was working on the wounded, hands moving fast, praying out loud between the gunfire. "Lord, guide my hands. Lord, give me strength. Lord, don't let this boy die." And then I heard something that changed everything. A voice calling from the fog, American accent. "Fox Company, this is Easy Company. We're coming in. Don't shoot." Corrigan grabbed my arm. His grip was like iron. "Easy Company was overrun 2 hours ago," he said quietly. "There is no Easy Company anymore." The shapes kept coming toward us. American uniforms, American voices. But the Germans had already taken prisoners by then, already stripped the dead, already learned to use our own words against us. "Hollister," Corrigan said, "if I'm wrong, God forgive me." He raised his rifle. He didn't fire. Thank God he didn't fire. They were Easy Company. 7 survivors out of 160 men, 2 of them wounded, all of them hollow-eyed and stumbling. They'd walk through German lines in the fog, more luck than skill, carrying their wounded on their backs. One of them was Marcus Webb, gut shot, shrapnel lodged somewhere in his abdomen, barely conscious, being carried by 2 others who looked like they might collapse at any moment. He was 19 years old, same age as Tommy, from a tobacco farm in Kentucky, had a girl named Clara waiting for him back home. Doc Abernathy examined him, and I watched his face fall. "He needs surgery," Doc said quietly so Webb couldn't hear. "Real surgery, a hospital. There's nothing I can do here except keep him comfortable." Comfortable, that meant morphine. But Doc only had 4 syrettes left, and we had 8 wounded now. The math didn't work. It never worked. Webb was conscious, lucid despite the pain. He looked up at Doc and almost smiled. "Just patch me up," he said. "I'll walk it off." Everyone pretended to believe him. The orders came an hour later. Fall back. Position compromised. German armor closing in. But we couldn't take everyone. 3 walking wounded could move on their own, but Webb and 2 others couldn't walk at all. No stretchers, no vehicles, no way to carry them through miles of frozen forest with Germans on every side. Corrigan made the call. I watched his face as he did it, watched something die behind his eyes. "Webb, Simmons, Garrett, you stay here. We'll send someone back for you, I promise." Webb didn't protest, didn't argue, just nodded, like he'd been expecting it. "Give 'em hell for me," he said. Doc Abernathy refused to leave. "I'm staying with my patients," he said. Corrigan had to physically drag him away, and I could hear Doc crying as we moved into the trees, the Lord's Prayer over and over, getting quieter as we moved further from that foxhole. I looked back once, saw Webb watching us go, propped up against the frozen earth, one hand pressed against his stomach. Then the fog swallowed him. 6 hours later, Fox Company was down to 12 men, lost in the forest. No radio contact, no idea where the lines were anymore, or if there were any lines left at all. Tommy's arm had turned black from the elbow down. Frostbite. Doc did what he could, but we all knew what that color meant. Corrigan was getting confused, making strange decisions, talking to people who weren't there. The cold was eating his brain, and I couldn't stop thinking about Webb, about that foxhole we'd left behind, about the promise Corrigan had made. I told Corrigan I was going back. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. "If you're not back by dawn," he said, "we're not waiting." We shook hands. I don't remember what I said. Probably nothing important. Then I turned and walked back into the darkness, alone. 3 hours. That's how long it took me to find that foxhole again. 3 hours moving through frozen forest in the dark, passing German positions close enough to smell their cigarette smoke, hear their laughter. I kept moving. I don't know why. Something pulled me forward. Guilt, maybe, or stubbornness, or just the feeling that I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. The foxhole was covered in snow when I found it, silent. I was certain I'd find a frozen corpse. I brushed away the snow, and Marcus Webb opened his eyes. 8 hours, no morphine, no plasma, 14 degrees below zero, blood frozen to his uniform, frost on his eyelashes. And he looked up at me and said, "What took you so long?" He shouldn't have been alive. I know that now, and I knew it then. The cold had slowed his bleeding, kept his organs from shutting down, but it should have killed him a dozen other ways. Hypothermia, shock, exposure, any one of those should have taken him. But there he was, breathing, conscious, looking at me with eyes that still had fight in them. Simmons was dead beside him, frozen solid, curled up like he was sleeping. Garrett was still breathing, but barely. His eyes opened when I shook him, and his mouth moved, forming a single word. Go. I couldn't carry both of them. I knew that. Webb knew that. We looked at each other, and I saw him make the decision before he spoke. "Take Garrett," Webb said. "I can wait." I shook my head. "You've waited long enough." I lifted him onto my shoulders, fireman's carry the way they taught us in basic, and I started walking. He was heavier than he looked, or maybe I was weaker than I thought. Every step was agony. My legs screamed. My lungs burned. The snow came up past my knees. Webb talked to keep himself awake, told me about the farm back in Kentucky, about his mother's biscuits, about Clara, the girl he was going to marry. "She's got red hair," he said, "red like autumn leaves. I think about her every night." I just kept walking. The flashlight beams cut through the trees without warning. German voices, close, getting closer. I dropped into a shell crater, Webb on top of me, both of us buried in snow. I could feel his heartbeat against my chest, slow, too slow, fading. A German soldier walked within 5 feet of us. I could see his boots through the snow, young boots, barely worn. He shined his light across the crater, and for a moment it passed right over us. Webb started to moan. Coming out of shock, the cold wearing off, the pain breaking through. I covered his mouth with my hand and prayed harder than I'd ever prayed in my life. The soldier paused, listened, shined his light directly on the snow pile where we were hiding. Our eyes met. His face was young, 17, maybe 18, exhausted. There was something in his expression I didn't expect, not hatred, not bloodlust, something else. He looked at us for what felt like an hour. Then he shouted over his shoulder, "Nick's here," and moved on. I've thought about that boy every day since. Why didn't he turn us in? I hope he made it back to Germany. I hope he grew old, had children, found peace. Dawn was breaking when I finally saw American lines ahead. I'd fallen 3 times in the last mile, each time harder to get up. Webb had stopped talking an hour ago. I wasn't sure if he was still breathing. I collapsed at the edge of a clearing, screaming for help, not caring anymore if Germans heard me. My voice was raw, barely human. And then Corrigan emerged from the tree line. They'd waited. Against orders, against common sense, they'd waited. Doc Abernathy was running before anyone else moved, dropping to his knees beside Webb, checking his pulse. I watched his face change, surprise, then wonder, then something like awe. "He's alive," Doc said. "My God, he's still alive." 14 hours. Marcus Webb had spent 14 hours in that frozen hole, and his heart was still beating. They got him to a field hospital on the back of a Jeep, strapped to the hood because there was no room inside. The surgeon who operated on him, a tired man from Cleveland who'd been working for 36 hours straight, came out afterward and just shook his head. 14 hours, he said. "That's impossible. The cold should have killed him. The blood loss should have killed him. I don't understand how he's still alive." Neither did I. Neither did anyone. Webb spent 3 months in a hospital in England. The shrapnel had missed everything vital by millimeters. He never saw combat again. When I visited him before he shipped out, he shook my hand and said 2 words. "Thank you." That was enough. Fox Company lost 157 men in those 3 days. Corrigan, made lieutenant, lost 2 fingers to frostbite. Tommy Delaney lost his arm, sent home, never wrote to his girl again. Doc Abernathy kept working through Christmas Eve, saving lives until a shell found him on Christmas morning. I buried what was left of him myself. The history books remember the Battle of the Bulge for Bastogne and Patton. They don't remember the thousands left in foxholes, The wounded who waited hours for evacuation that never came, the impossible survivors who defied every medical explanation. Marcus Webb went home to Kentucky in the spring of 1945. Married Clara that summer. She did have red hair, just like he said. They had 5 children together, 11 grandchildren, 23 great-grandchildren at last count. One grandson became a trauma surgeon. Said his grandfather's story made him want to save lives. Said he thinks about Webb every time he loses a patient, reminds himself that miracles happen, that you never give up on someone until they give up on themselves. Webb died in 2017, 91 years old, natural causes. Peaceful, they said. I visited him once in 1982, the first time we'd seen each other since the war. We sat on his porch in Kentucky, looking out at the tobacco fields, and we didn't say much. Didn't need to. He shook my hand before I left. "Thank you for coming back," he said. "Thank you for not leaving." That was the last time I saw him. I'm 99 years old now. Most of the boys from Fox Company are gone. Tommy passed in 2008. Corrigan in 2015. Just me left, I think. The last one who remembers what it was like. People ask me sometimes what kept Marcus Webb alive those 14 hours. The doctor said it was the cold, slowed his metabolism, preserved his organs. Maybe that's true. But I was there. I saw his eyes when I found him. There was something else keeping him going, something the doctors couldn't measure. Clara, maybe. The thought of getting home. Or maybe just stubbornness. That Kentucky farm boy refusing to quit. I think about Doc Abernathy sometimes. About Garrett, who told me to go. About that German boy who could have ended both of us and chose not to. I think about Danny Bishop, whose last words were about his mother. Every December, when the first frost comes, I step outside and stand in the cold for a while. Just stand there, feeling it on my skin. I don't know why exactly. Maybe I'm trying to remember. Maybe I'm trying to forget. Webb's granddaughter sent me a photograph last Christmas. The whole family gathered around the tree. 23 great-grandchildren laughing, opening presents, not knowing anything about frozen foxholes or German artillery or a 19-year-old boy who refused to die in Belgium. That's the thing about war nobody tells you. It's not the battles you remember. It's the silences, the spaces between the gunfire, the questions you never get answered. Why didn't anybody come? Webb asked me that back in December 1944, frost on his eyelashes, blood frozen to his uniform. I came. That's the only answer I ever had. Maybe that's enough.